Good morning. You can all hear me? Good morning. That's better, right? Hello. Good morning. Well, welcome to ASU and the library. My name is Shannon Walker. Most of you probably gotten some kind of email from me recently, so you know my name. Now you know my face. Welcome to our library, ASU Library. Welcome to those of you who maybe are here from out of town to sunshine and warmth. We're glad to share that with you. Um, So Project Stand for us is accumulation of a couple of years of planning. So it's great to finally see the day arrive, and we're excited to just share everything that we've been planning with you. We do have one minor technicality today. Lael Hughes Watkins, who's our Project Stand representative, her flight was delayed. And so she is stuck in Atlanta. She's scheduled to speak, I think, about 10:30, 10, and we're going to move her remarks to the closing today. So don't leave early. Stay for the whole thing. She will. She also has our fancy programs. So the fancy glossy programs, those will be here when she arrives too. So for now, you got the paper thing. Logistics, some logistics. Hopefully, if you haven't found it already, the restroom is just right across the hall in the way over there. We also have coffee, tea, water at the back of the room. If you're hungrier than what we have here, there's a little healthy cafe downstairs, and you probably pass Starbucks and that kind of things in the Memorial Union, just right across the hallway. We do have Wi-Fi here. Hopefully your computer, your phone, smartphone will connect to it right away. Just sign in as an ASU guest. We also have at the back of the room during breaks and things like that, a button maker if you feel like you want to make a button to commemorate your time with us here today. And we have staff person Shiloh can help make buttons. She's an expert button maker, I think. At lunchtime, we will validate parking. So if you parked in one of the garages and you have the blue ticket, we'll validate that for you. Let me see if there's anything else. Also, I did want to acknowledge another National Project Stand person. Era Tanzi is here from the University of Cincinnati. So Lael, Era, and Tamar Shute are kind of the point people on Project Stand nationally. Tamar is at the Ohio State University, and she could not be here because of work obligations, like I mentioned before. Lael, who is from the University of Maryland, stuck in Atlanta, should be here by noon, hopefully. And then Era is from the University of Cincinnati. Okay, all right, good memory. So we will welcome. We're to have her here with us. So at this time, we're honored to have Gabe Garcia from the ASU Royalty Court and Alex Soto, who is a library staff member, and they're going to do a land acknowledgement and blessing for our event.
Skutax, Anianap Chugi, Alex Soto, Anianap object, Owa Sikton Autumn object. I just introduced myself and Thon Autumn. As mentioned, I work at the Library Center as the operations supervisor. I've been with the ASU library system since 2017. This morning, before we let Gabe sing a song and bless the space in that way, I just wanted to read a statement that's been months in the making, possibly years, you would say, in the making, that the ASU library has put out to acknowledge, their role in supporting Native students. So at this time, I'll just read a statement, and then we'll let Gabe share some songs here. So the ASU library acknowledges the 22 Native nations that have inhabited this land for centuries. Arizona State University's 4 campuses are located in the Salt River Valley on ancestral territories of indigenous peoples, including the Accomaw-O'odham and the Peepash Indian communities, whose care and keeping of these lands allowed us to be here today. ASU Library acknowledges the sovereignty of these nations and seeks to foster an environment of success and possibility for Native American students and patrons. We are advocates for the incorporation of indigenous knowledge systems and research methodologies within contemporary library practice, and the ASU Library welcomes members of the Accomaw-O'odham, Peepash, and Native nations to the library. Sorry. So at this time, I'll let Gabe come up here and share some words.
Supple. Now I'm kind of a little worried because I totally forgot that I parked in a paid parking area and I totally forgot to pay the bill. So hopefully I haven't got a ticket yet. But anyway, Skuk Ani Napjaki Gabriel Garcia Gumo Amjad Bisan Moa Chikshan Chit Habaki Ski Kiktam and in Yamastram Arshon Chikshan Kukut Hamastram and in Yamastram Mantamaya Supply Chain Management Global Technology and Development. Ani was first attendant to Mr. Indian Arizona State University 2019-2020. So good morning, guys. Hi there. So my name is Gabe Garcia. I am from the Pisimola district of the Thanatam Nation. I study here at Arizona State University, my first year graduate student. I currently am studying global technology and development. And so with that, I like to jump into the point of the song that I'm about to sing. So this song is called The Green Mountain, Judak Dwak. And the point of it is that, you know, we as Altham people, our ancestors, and everybody that, you know, we currently have present, all tribes come together and we sing a song. And together, and when we sing this song, it brings a lot of sympathy and a lot of joy and collaboration among all the people. As we go upon this mountain, as we travel together, all of us are in sync in this dance that we do. And what the point of the song is that, okay, how many of you guys seen Rise of the Planet of the Apes? Have you guys seen it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Of the new trilogy? Yeah, the first one? All right, so do you remember how Caesar talks to, I forgot the orangutan's name. But anyway, he's talking to the orangutan's name, and he has the example of a stick, and he breaks the stick. And he tells them, if we have all of us together, which he grabs multiple sticks, he's like, we're strong. We're strong people as one. That's kind of like the point of this song. And so with that, we not only acknowledge those of today's generations of all of them, and the possibility or all the new possibilities that are coming forth for them in this new education, and them growing their wisdom out in different ways than what we used to do, taking advantage of that. But we also acknowledge everybody who comes upon these lands, not only over here, but throughout all indigenous communities. So with that, I guess I shall start singing. Tapo.
Tapo, thank you.
Thank you, Gabe and Alex. All right, at this time, we have a brief introduction from Lori McAllister and Jim. Is Jim speaking to? Yeah, and Jim O'Donnell, the university librarian. So,
Do you want to go first, Jim, or shall I? Thank you to Alex and Gabe for opening our symposium today. I'm grateful that you've chosen to be here, and I'm sorry that there are columns in the way. I'll try to walk around. So I'm Lori McAllister. I'm the Associate University Librarian for Collection Services and Analysis here at ASU. You are on Tempe campus, which is our largest campus at ASU. It's home to around 60,000. Is that correct? 60,000 students? Up more, 70,000. ASU has approximately 110,000 enrolled students online and in residential programs. The library has 9 library locations across 4 campuses. So just a little bit of context, because people did ask me some numbers this morning. And in January 2018, we committed to hosting Project Stand, and we're excited to see the fulfillment of that this week. The goal of Project Stand, for those of you who don't know, is documenting the activities of student groups that represent the concerns of historically marginalized communities and the work of others who advocate for support the interests of those communities. This goal resonated with us and our archivists, and we wanted to make sure that we could be part of this important conversation. It's also aligned with the university and the library's commitment to inclusion. And I'll just read you, for those of you who are not familiar with ASU, we do have this baked into our charter. ASU is a comprehensive public research university measured not by whom it excludes, but by whom it includes and how they succeed. It advances research and discovery of public value and assumes fundamental responsibility for the economic, social, cultural, and overall health of the communities it serves. And the library takes this very seriously, and we hope that this event and the discourse that comes out of our next 2 days will move this forward and help us achieve this very important charter. So what I would like to do actually is to recognize the planning team. So will you please stand up, planning team? Because a lot of folks have done a lot of work to get here. So I'm just going to introduce you very quickly. This is Nancy Godoy, Alana Varner, Jessica Sallow, and Shannon Walker, who has, she says it's game day. We're here. Okay, so I just wanted to recognize the folks that have put in a lot of effort and thank them for their time.
thanks. Thank you for your support. And now just a few comments from our university librarian, Jim O'Donnell.
Sure. Thank you, Shannon, and welcome everybody. I don't need to say much. I'm glad that Lori just read the university charter. If you're not of the university, that may sound a little unfamiliar to you. Not many universities read their charter for events like this, but not many universities have a charter that they can be, I think, as proud of as we are. If you're not familiar with the campus, when you walk out of here and walk up this walkway toward the Cross Street University, you should keep an eye out for where we keep that charter carved in stone. And Lori's right, we take it seriously here in the library. One of the themes of the work we've done in the last few years has been making sure the library is a place that records the monuments of civilization, including all those monuments of civilization created by people who didn't traditionally get to expect that their family papers would be in the archives of some great library someplace or other, but rather the people who have made civilizations without always getting the credit, without always getting the memory that they deserve. And so people in the library like Nancy and Shannon have been very important in helping us shift our protocols and paradigms so that we are genuinely inclusive in what we collect and in the ways we open things out. Long way to go. It's a long history of some different practices, but events like this are vital in making it possible that we proceed. So Nancy and company and the organizing committee, thank you, congratulations. It's game day. I think is this a coin toss now? Is that what happens? Okay, I'll get out of the way and get off the field and let you guys have some fun. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, now we will have a presentation from special guests, very special guests who have joined us here today from the DocNow program. I'm going to go ahead and read the description of their workshop. So as it says, as members of the Documenting the Now training team, Micha Brodnax and Jessica Neal, Neal, will engage participants in a co-learning workshop. Participants will identify personal and collective documentation creation habits, utilization, dissemination, and stewardship practices. The primary objective of the workshop is to facilitate a dialogue on record creation as a way of evidencing and memorializing student activism, protests, experiences, social justice initiatives, and dissent. Utilizing a term coined by Neal and Brodnax, digital legacy making. Participants will consider ways to disrupt analog memory work barriers and archival silences. Digital legacy making is intentionally centering the individual and groups responsible for creating, curating, owning, and preserving personal and ephemeral memories, experiences, and histories in the digital space. Through dialogue, we hope to stimulate thinking on the necessity to create tools that are accessible for folks present and not present in this space. So we're really excited to have them. We decided to put their program, their workshop at the beginning of our program because it really lays the foundation for the rest of our symposium, both today and tomorrow. So welcome, Jessica and Micha, and let's welcome them, have them on come forward.
Hello. Yes. Testing. I always wanted to say testing in my. So good morning. I'm Jessica Neal, and this is Micha Brodnax, and we are really grateful to be in community with you all today, and especially excited to be facilitating the Learning from Communities workshop we do with Documenting the Now, with the Documenting the Now team, and on behalf of that team. And for people who are not familiar with Documenting the Now, they just provide a strong commitment to prioritizing ethical practices when working with social media content. And we've been doing this workshop for about 2 years now, so we're really happy to be here with you all doing Learning with Community. So I'm going to pass it over to Micha.
Excellent. So good morning, y'all. I already have slightly bad news considering how you view things. Our activity today does include group work, so you'll be in community with the person next to you potentially, but we might actually request that everyone form tables of at least 5. So I see some folks may have to battle it out on who's going to join with who. But if we can get in groups of at least 5, sorry to have us already moving. Oh, you already clicked it. Go ahead, girl. Huh? Oh, okay. Oh, I had to miss it. Oh, they are. Excellent. I did not bring my phone over here. You don't know how to do this. We don't know. I'll be right back. We'll do your best. 4 is fine. We'll let that pass. 4 is fine. Excellent. So thank you all for that smiling spirit as you move tables. I know sometimes I might have like my coffee out and like I've strategically placed my position in a room. So I appreciate the kindness that you all shared in finding another one and joining groups. So thank you for that. So yeah, Jessica did a good job introducing ourselves. And so just to add on to that, what has looked like is us working in different communities, being in space with folks, and actually conducting this workshop that we're going to do with you all. So hopefully there's some new folks at your table or folks that you are just now meeting today or only know a little bit. So what we like folks to do, generally do this in a big circle, but we want to be kind to ourselves and knowing that that might take a while and just with the polls in the room. But we ask that, and some folks have already started to introduce themselves, but if you could say your name, your pronouns, and something that we like to center for folks is how you labor. And so it doesn't necessarily like a title or look like you mentioning what you monetarily get compensated for, but literally, what are some of the things that you do and that you labor? So in communities. So for me, I would say my name is Micha Brodnax. I use she, they pronouns. And for those of us in the room who are not quite familiar on why we are sharing our pronouns, just so we can acknowledge gender diversity and let people tell you how they like to be referred. And we want to create space for that. So I use she, they pronouns. And then I labor. I always like to take a moment just to center myself and think about that as thoughtfully as possible and what's showing up. I labor as a daughter of a single mother. I labor as a little slash big sister. I'm actually a little sister, but I sometimes feel like I play the role of a big sister. I labor as a memory worker in an academic institution. I labor as a friend. I labor as a new homeowner. And something that's on my heart, I labor honestly as a Black person working in a predominantly white institution. I think sometimes it rings louder than it does, but right now that's been loud in my head as far as thinking about the care work um, and my attempts to bring more mindfulness to that space. So I'm going to let Jessica do that. Same exercise, and then we're going to turn it over to you all to do that in your groups.
All right. I did say my name is Jessica Neal, but I go by Jess, so feel free to call me Jess. This is one of my favorite parts of our workshop because it's the only times I really do a check-in with myself. Like, how do you labor? What's going on with you? Especially working in these archives. So first, and what's most present is I labor as a motherless child and a sister to only brother, my only sibling rather. Also laboring as a Black person in a, I wouldn't say a predominantly white institution, but a very white institution, but an institution I enjoy nonetheless. And just laboring with myself right now as I grow and getting rid of old habits and bad habits, which feels good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. And shout out to the people who gave me that thumbs up on the low. That was great communication. Yes, love it. All right. Thank you all for being in conversation. It was really sad that walking around, I would love to have been present at the table, but you all are doing a really good job as far as making eye contact. I heard some folks speaking to their identities and ways that they labor. Some people in this room that are familiar to my eyes, so I've seen you before, but it was really beautiful to hear how you identify and some of the things that you're laboring on. Oftentimes you're in spaces and it's just your name and where you work, and that's as static as we go. So I appreciate you all just participating and expanding on that, just giving people a better idea of how you're showing up today and what are some of the things that are on your mind. So thank you for that. So next we're going to move into our activity. Shout out to Jessica over here. I did not recall your last name. Say hello, for passing out papers around the table. Not everyone needs one, but it's great if you have one in front of you. We're going to also share those, the next part on the screens all around the room. So no worries if you don't see it. So everyone should have cards in front of them, and they should have three colors: red, yellow, and green. We're basically going to say a number of statements, and you will put up the card that corresponds to you. So red would mean disagree, green would mean agree, and yellow is like somewhat agree, somewhere in the middle of there. Alrighty, so everyone should just about have the cards in your hands if you're able, or have them on the table. Whatever way you feel you're best going to be able to put the card up. We're going to say a statement one at a time, and then we'll give space for you all to kind of look around the room, particularly looking at your table, maybe looking at folks across the room to kind of get an idea of what do your peers think, what do other folks in this room think about these questions.
So yeah, we're going to jump right into the section titled Documentation Practices. So the first statement is, I use photography to document experiences. Okay. The second statement is, I keep a journal to take notes or write diary entries. All right. I share documents that demonstrate my annotations in a journal or a zine. Interesting. I use social media to share information. Okay. My social media accounts demonstrate my engagement with issues important to me. All right. Maps and geotagging are important in documenting sites of action. I use paper and digital flyers to create awareness of events. All right. So in this next section, group questions, we just want you to take the time and discuss with your group at the tables about documentation practices. So here are the questions, and we'll take about 5 minutes on that.
I'm going to give about 1 more minute before we come back together.
Alrighty, we're gonna come back together. Thank you for talking with your groups. We wanted to take this time to give you all the opportunity to share back what your groups discussed. So the first question is, how have technology shifted the way protests are communicated, executed, and documented? And anyone can just kind of hop in here and share back what their group discussed.
So for our group, we talked about a couple of different things. I particularly brought up, for me, as a positive where this question comes in is regarding the Ferguson protest. I literally would not have known anything really about what went on during the Ferguson protest if it wasn't for social media. I followed everybody that I could possibly think of during that time that had any hashtag about Ferguson, had any information about Ferguson, anything along those lines. And so for social media, I appreciate that because I wouldn't have known anything about Ferguson. We also discussed, at least for me, I've also brought up the negative aspects of doing this regarding social media. Recently with the Hong Kong protests, there was a lot of concern about the protesters having their locations documented by the government through their phones, through social media, through different things. And so that is very concerning on my end regarding just being able to be a protester, to have my privacy, to have certain things that aren't available to the government, but somehow they can get to it through my geotagging, through my location, through my phone, through anything along those lines. And so that was definitely something that we individually and collectively talked about at our table. Thank you. Anyone else like to share back? Thank you.
What did we share? We talked about, well, we talked about how like you can, like Jess said, that you can see what's happening in other places around the world. And we talked a lot about following sources or following people on social media who are on the ground and to see what really is happening in real time or what happened, because oftentimes the news will skew things in different ways. Alex mentioned having it a way to not get so hyped up in a lot of the talking heads and to really stay true to community work and what we're focused on. And that comes from like a long trajectory of movement work. We talked about, we talked about like a viral video from, I don't know if anybody's seen Las Tesis, the protest that started in Chile, and it's like a feminist movement against the femicides. And they had this chant, and they did it in it was organized by a small group in Chile, in Santiago, or in Valparaiso, and they had like a couple hundred people. And that video, basically they call out the femicides, and I'm doing this because they have a dance. And then they like point to and they call out like the femicides, they call out rape, they call out patriarchy, they call out the state. And so it's pretty radical. And spread through social media, went viral. Then people started doing that same protest, replicated in different languages in like 32 different countries. And then I was at a bar at the end of a conference in Mexico a couple weeks ago, and it wasn't planned. And this woman had remixed it to reggaeton music. And like every woman in the whole bar just started like screaming it and doing the thing. And so in that way, social media and like wasn't planned, which meant that we were all having our little like private revolutions at home, you know, practicing the words and doing the movement and, you know, like trying to free ourselves. And so it just became this like action spontaneously. And so in that way, we were saying that the video is kind of a mobilizing thing through social media and also like training for us. So
Thank you for that.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, that hit on like viral mobilization, communication, just spreading things. That was really good. So one of the things we want to do is kind of go back to those statements.
So we just want to go to the second question really quick before we go back to the statements. The second question was, how do individual approaches to documentation impact collective activism work? Can anyone share back on that? Okay.
Sorry, a little bit less intellectual example. I apologize ahead of time. So we're, I think for me, one of the initial questions about documentation practices that threw me for a loop a little bit was the question about I keep a journal to take notes or write diary entries, because I think in the past I have kept a journal. Like I want to say, maybe you can relate like your teenage years, right? You kept a journal. But over time, I don't keep a journal now, and part of that is I think especially of the teenage journals, right? What you put in there's a lot of it is embarrassing now, right? You look at it now and you're like, oh my gosh, I had a crush on so and so, and I hope he talks to me today, and things like that, right? Reading that 20 years later is a little bit mortifying, especially if your children found it, right? And they're reading it, oh my gosh, mom, what I can't believe you wrote this. Like, right, I was a teenager, yeah. And so I think I now have like deliberately chosen not to record some of those things. But at the same time, then in 10, 15, 20 years, what will my kids know about my high school experience? It'll be missing those salacious details, right? It'll be it'll be somewhat sanitized. It'll be whatever's in the yearbook and or my scrapbook kind of thing. It will be missing the who I had a crush on in the moment and which coach I was mad at because they didn't play me and whatever. So, so that was just sort of our, less intellectual example of why I didn't personally document some things, right? Why I choose not to. So.
Yeah, I'm going to pass to walk them.
I was going to say, also, as archivist as well, I think a lot of this this question is very interesting, as specifically to me, because I know that I've also written in journals or things about that in my teenage years. But as Shannon said, I really wouldn't want anybody to come across them. And so as archivists, we really take that type of thing and we kind of cringe because it's just kind of like, well, this is documenting who you are, documenting history, documenting these different things. And so why wouldn't you want to do that? But again, everybody has their own individual reasons and understandings of how they document themselves and how they move in the world. And so it definitely is an individual choice, and to have it impact the collective, especially if you're doing activism work, I feel like it would be really important to try and have your individual notes and individual documentation, because if you're part of this movement like Ferguson or what Kate was talking about, these things are really important because, again, they document what is happening currently and throughout the history of when you were alive, but then it can also inform people going forward.
I guess I'm the only one who still keeps like a book, like in Mean Girls, and scratches out people's faces when they upset me. Right. Okay.
So is this working? Okay. Um, so you all saw me very conspicuously walk in late, so I apologize. But one thing in similar to what you all were talking about, but in terms of how, I guess, individual practices can impact larger groups goes back to something that the first group mentioned earlier, and that's about sort of privacy and tracking and how that works, right? So I might not feel particularly threatened or think about something, and while doing movement work could be recording sort of the actions and things of other people within that movement, or recording a protest or something like that, and that could have an impact not necessarily just on me but other people who are around me, right? So that a comment that came up in this conversation at our table is that one of our members was talking about being interested initially about documenting sort of movement across sub-Saharan Africa, and one of her mentors brought up, well, if some of those migration stories are very sensitive and can have serious impacts on those communities, and so recording sort of geotagging and things like that have sort of these broader impacts that we need to be very cognizant of when we're doing them, not just sort of the immediate impact or the impact on us, but sort of the larger group. So.
Sorry, I really know that about that point also about geotagging and individual participation in social media. Just a few years ago, just to kind of presence what many of us know as far as like anti-protest legislation. So like in 2017, when I moved back home, they tried to pass legislation that anybody who was involved indirectly, even via social media, for a protest that did not have a permit would potentially be subject to prosecution, and also potentially have assets like taken. And so like that, just to kind of presence that that's also something that happens through social media as a tactic against us in movement work. So it didn't pass, but it always pops back up. So.
So I think what we're starting to hear is the risks associated with these documentation practices. And I think Shannon and Jessica did a good job over here just thinking about some of the things that are going into your mind when you're thinking about recording. But I also hope that as archivists or as memory workers, we're keeping in mind context or nuance, that someone may document this aspect of themselves, or we might see this trace of themselves, but not necessarily the full picture of it. So we also want to just give you all space. If you had anything else that came up for you when we were doing the questions or saying the statements around documentation practices, were you surprised at anything, at any of the questions or the statements that were asked? Was there a moment where we saw a green consensus across the room? Is there anything that like made you think, oh wow, I wish I was doing more of that? Or do we have any initial responses to the idea of how we're personally documenting ourselves in this room?
I think for me, it's the one question I think for me that kind of tripped me up a little bit was about the maps and geotagging. Um, it's really hard to kind of understand just the impact that geotagging has had in our lives. And I think for me, it has definitely brought home that, again, I'm very concerned about my privacy, very concerned about the things that are put out into the world that have my name associated with it, that have my image associated with it. And so to have maps or geotagging be something that I can't even consent to sometimes regarding my image or anything along those lines, it definitely concerns me. And so for me, I try to be as aware and as, I guess, informed as I possibly can about these particular things that while I can control some things in my life, I don't think I can control everything. But to still be informed and still have, an idea of how they're used either for or against me, that really is something that I'm very aware of and try very hard to make sure that I understand and can either speak to other people about if they don't know much about it, or try to tell them that, hey, this is happening, and maybe you, if you would like to know more about it or want to know more about it, that you should go to these resources in order to find out the information that you would want about that.
Absolutely. And I think something I saw kind of mixed cards around the room was my social media accounts demonstrate my engagement with issues important to me. So I know for me, it depends on the day. If I post about lemonades and trying to see who's selling those cookies, that's important to me on that day. But mostly, I do try and use my social media to share important information about any social movements that are going on or connecting people together. So does anyone else have an opinion on what they post on their social media?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that right as you were talking. And for me, with social media, but Twitter, that's where I tend to talk more about social movements or retweeting a lot of things that people have already posted. But Facebook has been the space where I've probably become a lot more cautious of what I post, because I feel like that tends to be the place where I've gotten more aggressive reactions to things that I didn't necessarily feel warranted that. And for that reason, when that happened a few years ago, I actually made my Twitter private, especially around the 2016 election, because I was just like, I do not want people going after me for something that I don't even think was political at all to begin with. And so gradually I did a couple of years ago end up making my Twitter public again, because I felt like that was a really great way to connect more with people in my profession and just to learn more of what archivists were doing, especially within communities within that. And but still with that, I would say I'm still very particular even about what I retweet. I think I have enough people in the field now that I kind of know who I go could advocate for me if that was needed, but it's still an area that I think is a very cautious area.
Um, Myself, before I got into libraries and archives, as a career, I was an organizer and had a lot of experience in my immediate community in the Tohono Nation, and as a musician as well. So like my social media at the time was of course dedicated towards those issues and those causes. So when I shifted over more into this work, I was very conscious of what was shared, similar to what was mentioned. I was like, okay, certain things I need to lock down or just be aware of. But in light of just the lack of media justice around my community around that issue, which a lot of y'all probably see, mainstream media, what's going on with the border wall and the desecration, I appreciate the awareness that the shares and the likes, but it's the same narrative essentially. There's no grassroots voices. There's no people from those communities that are telling their story. So myself, I share, my posts there and there. And as mentioned by Kate, me and her have been friends outside of work for years. It's like it does provide that context to be like, okay, here's what is being said on the mainstream level, but here's someone who's from that community, who's rooted in that community, who knows like the frontline folks and the different degrees of the hierarchy within our communities around activism, to be like, here's a source of authority or someone that can at least share some context other than what you see on the news. So I feel it's important to use my social media. Of course, as a musician, you're trying to promote yourself, but in this case, it's like here we can use that as a platform as well. So.
Like I'm talking a lot today, but I have a lot to say. I also agree with what Alex just said. As I've gotten more into my professional career, I do have a Facebook, I have a Twitter, I have an Instagram. But I've noticed that over the years, especially, mental health issues are very important to me. And I noticed that social media sometimes is not very good for my mental health. And so I've been very cautious and aware that the amount of time that I spend on social media is is good when I am advocating for mental health awareness, when I'm advocating for the things that are important to me. But if I'm just scrolling or if I'm just doing things that are not productive, that causes me harm. And so I've greatly pulled back on my social media use, but at the same time, I do use it again for mental health awareness. I have a lot of friends who have personally thanked me on all of my social media recently about advocating for mental health awareness because I that's very important to me and very something that's near and dear to my heart. And so while I do use Facebook now, I use it very limitedly. I use it very sparingly, but I do use it for the things that I'm very passionate about.
Thank you. I think that's a great point. That rings true for me for Twitter. I think people who can master Twitter and post and keep up with all the issues, that's really great. I have trouble just making one post a month on Twitter. But yeah, mental health is a great issue to consider in these. I think I saw a hand back here at the table. Okay.
So I'm probably repeating what was just said, but yeah, social media is one of those areas that can become a little bit overwhelming. You know, you can take it too far pretty quickly. So I, at this point in my life, am probably medium posting things that are important to me or things that I feel like need to be voiced. But you know, I mean, it's a tough time. There's so much. We're bombarded by a lot of things that are negative, and yeah, offensive. So it's something that you have to kind of monitor for yourself and know what, you know, how much do you want to be engaged in the offense or the defense. I don't know.
Yeah, you really have to know your limits and your capacity. So I'm really grateful for Jessica for bringing up the mental health piece again. Okay.
So I actually am on Facebook all the time, an unhealthy amount because I have two Facebooks. I have a work Facebook, which is very professional and serious and kind of boring. And then I have the regular me Facebook, which is more an outlet for my humor and creative writing. But on the work Facebook, actually on both, I think a lot of the articles and political issues I post, I try to bring attention to things that aren't getting attention, especially issues related to Native nations, Hispanic community, LGBT issues, and things like that. And just posing them for people to respond to. Like just this morning, I posted an article from Capital Times about a proposed law that would eliminate criminal penalties for speeding up to 20 miles over the speed limit and no civil traffic fines for up to 10 miles over the speed limit. So I didn't put any commentary or opinion, just summarized what the article was with the link to the article. And I found that that can stimulate conversations that wouldn't necessarily happen otherwise around that, or you know, the environmental and cultural impacts of things like border wall construction. I don't have to say anything. I can just post it with a little, you know, excerpt from the article and get people talking about it, even if they can't access the article because it's a pay site or whatever. They know that it's happening at least. But it does get discouraging sometimes what things get circulation and reactions and what things don't as much. So like on my personal page, I posted a link to an article. It's a cute article about this monastery in South America that this dog wandered under the monastery and they made him an honorary friar. And there's pictures of him in little monk robes and it's cute. But that thing got so many shares, like ridiculous. I'm still getting notifications of, and it's kind of makes me mad now because all the other things that I think are funny or important are not getting nearly as much traction as that dog in monk's robes. So it makes me a little bit cynical about what are people willing to spend time and attention on. But you know, I do that too. It gets too heavy. So I have rules for myself about what I post. Like I've decided I won't criticize or nag people for things that I think are wrong or inappropriate on their pages. because A, they don't hear it, and B, it just makes them less willing to, you know, be in a relationship with me in a positive way. So I'm not going to do that, and I want to make sure that overall the balance of what I post is light and is focusing on good things to give people energy and feed their spirits, as opposed to, you know, because there's so much that we could focus on that's dark and horrible and wrong. And there's enough of that going on. So I feel like my job on social media places is to shine a light on the things that aren't getting attention, that help us have hope and optimism, and just get people thinking and talking, because they don't need my opinion. I can just point at things and let them come to their own conclusions and have their own discussions.
I've realized, and I've pulled back a lot in the last few years, sort of my social media presence. But what I have tried to maintain and be consistent about is I have a lot of sort of networks, international networks, through sort of my own history, my research, and that sort of thing. And and I have a lot of friends or colleagues in places where there's a lot of sort of what's the word? There's just a lot of policing around what they're able to share from their countries about things that are happening on the ground. So what I try to do, even if I'm avoiding social media, is if I see stories coming up, or my colleagues or friends saying, you know, this is really what's happening on the ground, they won't let us talk about it or whatever, I try to amplify those voices, because I'm in a place where I'm able to, where they might not be able to sort of circulate those narratives, and because of whatever the situation is there. Most recently, in the last week, there's been a lot of sort of riots in India and New Delhi. All of my dissertation and graduate work was there. So a lot of my friends who have been there have been sort of tweeting or posting things saying, you know, this is what the media is saying, this is actually what's happening. And so reposting and sharing those things, you know, that's, even though, you know, it's probably the first thing I've posted in months, but because that's been happening, so like I've been seeing still firsthand accounts from my friends, then I've, you know, made a point to say, okay, I need to log in and make sure that I'm sort of spreading that information. So I think I've kind of come to the place where a lot of the local stuff that's already getting circulated, it turns into kind of this, either it's an echo chamber and everybody sort of already agrees with me, or I'm just sort of bumping heads with folks that we're never going to see eye to eye. So I don't really bother with that anymore. But when it's something that I feel like I can do something because of my position where I am now, and I have access to certain things that folks in other sort of international networks don't, then that I think I make a point of using social media for.
It's really great to hear that people are not engaging with people who they know won't ever see eye to eye. So often I like type a message and then I just delete it. I'm like, no. So yeah, but dialogue is important overall.
Okay. Okay, there we go. I think I think everyone is right in their own opinion and what they're stating, but I think what gets kind of lost in translation with all of our work is that not apologizing, not being cautious. We, you know, like how everyone is stating that we'll post or make that voice for people that aren't being heard. You know, we have these people in positions who aren't using their voice or bringing voices to the table that aren't being heard. And we can't be cautious or being like, oh, you know, I'm in this job, which I'm sure you all are in positions to bring those voices to the table and, you know, to bring these issues that aren't being heard. And yes, it can be a little like, oh, it's political, you know, I'm going to be cautious here. Oh, I'm sorry I posted that because I offended you. But for so many years, that's how it's been. And that's why certain voices aren't brought to the table, or that's why certain issues aren't talked about in history. And that's why we're facing so many struggles as a society. So I know each and every one of you here has a position and has a voice and should be bringing and shouldn't be apologizing to other people that, you know, that's or not bringing certain issues to the table. And you don't have to force anyone, but we're in positions where we can educate each other and bring these of voices to the table, because I mean, I'm a freshman in college. And I mean, me as a Native American woman, it's always like I'm educating someone about something or the land that they're on or certain things. And it's not my responsibility to educate someone. I'm not getting paid, and none of us are, you know, with the work that each and every one of you are doing, which is incredible. And I admire. But it is our job to educate one another, because our government's not doing that, you know, education's not doing that, and we're all activists in our own work. But I think it's important to also remember not to apologize, because these voices are not being heard, and we are the ones that are trying to make them heard. So I mean, yes, you can hurt someone's feelings in the making of something, but you know, we need to educate each other. We need to have these discussions. We need to bring the one to start the conversation. And each and every one of you are doing that, and that's really awesome. But just remember not to apologize for everything like we do in society, because those people before us who had the voice and who you know, are creating these structures for us, they did not apologize. So just to keep that in mind. Thank you.
So this is actually a little bit of a piggyback on the comment about, you know, we're not getting paid. And one thing that hasn't come up yet, but I know a lot of archivists and librarians think about this, and those of you who know me will not be surprised by what I'm about to say, because I always find a way to talk about how much capitalism sucks wherever I go. But you know, sometimes I think, like, every time I post something, I'm not getting paid, but Mark Zuckerberg is, right? And so that's something I struggle with a lot, which is, you know, okay, we're using platforms like Twitter, Facebook, whatever, and people are sort of like, "Rah, rah, rah," you know, saying whatever they want to say, but who's getting richer, right? It's the people who control these platforms. And so I just think that's something I struggle with. And it's also something that I think when we talk about, you know, I'm not totally convinced of the liberatory potential of social media, because someone is getting rich from this documentation, but it's not the people who are making it.
Yes, yes. Was there another hand over here? Oh, yeah. Jessica.
Well, and I would say for me, when I said that I've been a bit more cautious of social media, I think for me, some of it is knowing that there could potentially be certain reactions. And I also feel like it's a matter of also, as we've said before, thinking about your mental health. I think for me, it's been a way of considering, if I don't post something on social media, can I channel that energy into a different way, into having more discussions with the people around me or learning more about the community? And so I think that's part of what it is for me at times, is sometimes I think you just need to get away from the screen and you need to have more conversations with people around you. And especially where I am at the University of Illinois, it can be very easy, as many archivists know, to kind of be in your corner because there's always so much work to get done. But it's also very important to have interactions with the people that you're trying to serve as well. So I think that's also why I tend to be cautious on social media, because it can very much drain you. And at times I feel like I could be doing something more productive in my time with the people around me. So it's definitely a balance of a little bit of everything.
I guess what I've noticed a lot is how much people are actually active on social media and how much people document themselves. As opposed to me, who I don't really document myself at all. I used to be undocumented, so for me, being invisible and kind of not seen has always been a second nature. And I can kind of see why people feel like being up in the forefront is really important, but sometimes I think it's important to realize that it can be really, really hard for some people to put themselves out there. Like even this right here is hard for me. I struggle a lot with that, and I do appreciate people who are out there doing the work that some of us might be a little bit fearful of doing for ourselves. So that's just what I wanted to say.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I can bring him back.
I love that you have a mic.
It probably says a lot about my personality. I actually wanted just to step back a little bit and make a comment about a comment you made about sort of owning these platforms and what sort of what is the liberatory sort of potential of some of these things. And actually link it back to something we talked about earlier about GIS mapping and tagging and stuff like that. I again, I'm very weary of sort of the who we're giving access in these moments when we're tagging things. But also, I recently finished a project about African American history here in the Valley, and I realized when I was going back and trying to sort of identify historic properties or relevant sort of spaces, that almost all of the things that had been identified just in 2005 or something in a survey have been, because they didn't qualify, they weren't old enough or whatever, weren't officially given that protection, and now they've all been demolished. So the importance of being able to, even if you can't, there's not a physical building or something for you to link to a particular historic past or relevance or whatever, being able to say that this space that's now a highway or a spot in the highway or in front of the Chase Stadium or whatever was actually one of the only spots, like the Rice Hotel. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it. It was a hotel in downtown Phoenix in a space that's literally like the street in front of Chase Stadium, but it was a stop on the Green Book because it was one of like only two places in Arizona that would house African Americans. It's no longer there. It's just a street now. But like trying to be, to me, I wish, and again, I don't have the skill set to do something like that, but if there was a way to sort of tag these types of places and not have it necessarily linked to Google or whoever owning it, I think it's really important form of documentation and archiving, because once sort of some of these other things that identify, like the Green Book is how I found this place that no longer exists. But if it's not on one of these things, and then the people who lived during that era, once they've passed on, some of that history is just gone. And so sort of figuring out, I guess, this sort of fine line between not wanting to sort of give up all of sort of our privacy or all of this information to sort of these sort of larger corporations that own the platforms, but also wanting to have a way of documenting these things so they stand sort of the test of time, and there's a recognition of what was there before. I mean, there's not an answer there, but if any of you happen to be amazing programmers or whatever, I feel like that's probably an opportunity there for somebody to do something. I mean, with geomapping, I think a lot of it has to do with who has access to the satellites, so that's a different thing. But there are other ways of mapping that don't necessarily link to that, right? So like actual paper maps and like that sort of thing. But anyway, thank you.
Hello. I wanted to go back to something that you said previously, something that a few people have kind of mentioned. I think it's something that's kind of important, something that we carry with us when we're in these spaces, right? I want to kind of focus on like the physicality of these digital spaces, these physical spaces. And the policing of them, right? And the idea that we have to constantly always be looking over our shoulder, always be power mapping, always be looking to who is behind the thing that is in front of us, and where does that go when it is no longer in my hands. And I thought that was a very interesting thing that was said. The like how difficult that is. I want to just really kind of bring attention to that and the kinds of spaces that we're able to create for ourselves. To illustrate that, while we were talking, while you mentioned exactly that, right behind, a police officer walked by. And he stood there for a minute. And he walked back the other way. And then he was in the American Indian library right there, right next to us. He was there for a minute. I don't know where he is now. But that's the kind of work that we have to do in the middle of my sentence, in the middle of her sentence. I have to, we all have to be wondering who is looking, who's around, who can listen in, and what does that mean for the words that I say, or the image that I put out, or anything, right? What does that mean to police myself so that I can't be, or so I won't be policed? And I think that's something that, in terms of archiving, is an incredibly important thing to sort of acknowledge, but it also brings up like terrible implications for the sort of truth of a statement, once it's accessioned and a researcher is looking at it, 10 years from now, and they're listening to the things that I'm saying right now. It's like, well, why did I say it this way? And what is it that I'm not saying? Those are the kinds of questions that, like, especially sort of the analog versions of archiving, of journaling and keeping physical notebooks, and I'm still a physical notebook kind of guy myself. Those types of things are able to answer those questions in a very different way than the digital realm does. If my phone knows where I am at all times when I don't know where I am, because that's happened. What does that mean versus when I say, well, I went to this place, or when a place that no longer exists, how you describe that in a book, or in your journal or something. I think about that in cars a lot. Whenever I'm with my family, we usually, we're going somewhere, there's always a story somewhere, and that place is now tied to that in between places from where we began and where we ended, but it also is tied to the physical place that we're talking about. These stories that are told when we're going somewhere. I recently had an experience where a friend of mine and that person's partner were telling me stories about the land that I'm on now, and these are stories that I can't find in books. I don't think that the like whatever part of the library has those kinds of stories. I don't even know if they would be there even. That these narratives and stories are tied to these places. They're these ghosts, these memories, these specters that, as long as you look, will haunt. But if you can't know, if you can't see, then those specters kind of walk on. And that's kind of the work that we do, right? I think I'm rambling, so I'll continue on. Thank you.
All right, we're going to take these next two questions, and then we're going to transition to the next section. Also, thank you for sharing.
Just wanted to share, kind of building on what Braveheart mentioned, in terms of like, as an Indigenous person in this line of work now, and dealing with this kind of coping with the responsibilities of knowing, libraries and archives and the definition of, being here in this room, but also as someone who's ancestrally from this part of the world. O'odham people stem from the Phoenix area down to Hermosillo. And as he was sharing, just like the knowledge, just like the history in this area, and what comes to mind is the South Mountain Freeway. I mean, that freeway desecrated South Mountain, which is Modak Dolak in our language. It's Greasy Mountain. And for many out here, no one knows that what it means to us as O'odham people from the Gila River Indian community, Salt River Indian community, Hiotchet O'odham, Thon O'odham. And it's just a balance of knowing how do we kind of make do with what we have to work with now with our land, and how do we use this technology? How do we use the archives? How do we use a Western system that never respected us to begin with? So there's definitely, content management systems out there that, kind of are touching on, documenting that history in a way that restricts it, so there's protocols behind it. But just having those conversations with my own community, it's just very difficult when elders, it's oral, they don't want to write this down. They don't want to sit in front of an oral history station. They don't want to scan their photos at first. But luckily, with projects such as the work that Nancy and Alana and Jess do, and the overall community-driven archives project, is that way to show that this is a source, a tool that we need to, I guess, in our sense, indigenize, where we can use it for us compared to them taking these stories from us, which was mentioned, with this maybe some of these books in this library as we speak. I mean, for sure in this library that have took information from us without asking. So as an O'odham, I guess, I'm in library school too, information professional here, trying to find the balance of using the technology and making it where it's us, it's Autumn, because that's what we've always done as indigenous people, is to find a way to adapt these tools. I mean, the fact that I'm sitting in this room using this laptop, and that's something, a lot of young people don't see sometimes, because they just want to only go into the himdoc, the culture, the traditional way. And I agree with that. But we also have to learn how to navigate the rat race, as my grandpa would say, out here in the white world. So yeah, it's just a lot. So when I was hearing what Braveheart was sharing, others around, GPS, it's like, I want our stories to be documented, but I don't want our GPS info where non-natives find our sacred sites, because that's something that's always been an issue. And at the same time, unfortunately, if you go through the federal process, they actually want to know those sites. So when they make their freeway, they can say, oh, well, we didn't blow up that particular site at that particular area. Which happened with that freeway? We'll just build around it, and then we'll reinforce it because we'll use NACPRA and all these federal laws. So it's definitely a challenge just to deal with, play the game, I guess you would say. But also, I feel it's important as people of color, indigenous, librarians, archivists in this field, to like really find that balance. And that's why I'm here today. And I'm glad that my Hajin Lulu over here, she's Hiachat Autumn. I'm glad that she spoke up and said that. You gotta just also be bold in what we do, because if we don't do it, who else is gonna do it? Unfortunately, if I don't step up, she doesn't step up, then we're gonna have non-natives come to our communities, and then we'll have to get them a nice cultural competency training to understand how it works, right? But that's just kind of from my perspective. I don't want to take up too much space, but yeah, I mean, a lot of the conversations, it's tenfolds in Native communities. So thank you.
Yeah, I'll just be brief, just to build off of that. As far as social media, and I just see white folks talking in circuit to white folks on social media, and hearing how so many people in this room get so exhausted on social media. White folks don't, because we don't risk. And so that's really true. And I just see it every day on social media, because we have the lowest threshold for risk taking because of we don't have to fight for stuff. And so a lot of other people get really exhausted. And I see it on social media, and then I see it in meetings, no matter what institution. I've worked at several, and I see it in social circles. I just want to call out that counterpart, and people aren't getting exhausted for no reason. It's so if I say that for white people, I say that for straight people, I say that for cis people, I say that for, a lot of privileges that we carry in multiplicity. So yeah, that's that.
Thank you for that very important point. While Micah is walking up to the front, I just want to take the time to shout out the people online. If you have questions, feel free to message them in on Zoom. We'll be happy to answer those for you or to read your statements. So the next section we're going to go into is preservation and organization practice. And so if you can get your cards back out, we're going to jump into that.
Alrighty. Yeah, thanks again for everyone sharing that generative conversation. It's really great to be mindful of the different ways people are engaging and negotiating themselves and their positionality as they're creating this documentation. And I guess our greatest hope is that archivists, memory workers of the future are able to capture all these different kinds of nuances and reasons why people are documenting or not. So with everyone having their cards out, as Jessica said, we're going to do the preservation organization practice statements. So the very first one. And as a lot of these have organization in the title, feel free, if you do not associate with organization, think about what communities that you are a part of as you're answering these questions. So you can easily take out organization and think about community. And that could be maybe a religious community, that could be professional community, that could be your friends group, or mapping on any kind of identities that are important to you and that you think you would be interested in having documented. So the first statement, my organization has a practice of passing on documents and information to the new and incoming leaders. Excellent. And for the new folks in the room, I apologize for not explaining this. There's 3 cards in front of you, and we're going to say statements. Green if you agree with the statement, yellow if you somewhat agree, and then red if you disagree. All right. My organization has experienced loss of documentation. My organization's records are well organized. My organization photos are intentionally saved in places outside of social media or an individual's phone. All righty. I think our digital presence, so your organization, I think our digital presence is important to us in being preserved. All right. I'm okay with the public aspects of my organization's campaign being archived without our consultation. Excellent. So this is a good question, thinking about archivists are thinking about what are ethical approaches to archiving things. So it's good to see some kind of diversity and representation of what are our interests there. I believe collecting data about me is a trade-off for participation in social media. And if you're having visceral reactions to some of these, totally fine. Right? These are statements, and I'm sure there's many things that can be tagged along with how we feel about these things. My organization is interested in working on archiving our material. Excellent. All right, thank you all for participating. So for the next 5 minutes, a real 5 minutes, we're going to give you all space to talk among each other, just some of your reactions to those statements, and then we'll kind of go over the questions. But if you could talk in your group, what are some of the things that are coming up for you as you're unpacking those statements? Many of you already organically started answering the question, so we're going to give about 2 more minutes.
All right, all right, all right. So we're gonna hello. Sorry. Yeah, we're gonna discuss some of the group questions that were asked. So the first one we're going to tackle is, are there risks associated with donating materials to the archives while still affiliated with the institution or organization? So feel free to jump in if anyone wants to share their thoughts on that question.
Hi. Yes, I think there are absolutely risks associated with donating materials, especially while you are still affiliated with the institution. So I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Oklahoma, and right now we're working with a lot of groups to try to expand our student life archives. And part of the problem that we have run into is that students who are a lot of the organizations that we're working with are in protest against the university, especially at the moment, and rightfully so. But they are hesitant to give their records to the institution which they are protesting against, which again, rightfully so. So I think, sorry, I'm trying to like piece this together. Yes.
it's helpful to have like a peer, I think, try to archive it, because we are trying to give them agency and visibility within the archives, but also without having to sacrifice any of their privacy or like information that they don't want the university to take a hold of.
I think that's a great point. I work at Hampshire, and so there was a big upheaval last spring. If anyone is in the know about that, you know. And students are hesitant to give me records, and I was totally not affiliated, not a part of that. And they're like, I'm still at this institution. Maybe when I graduate spring 20, then we can have a talk. But luckily, I have an Archives Alumni Fellow who went to Hampshire, and so they're more comfortable talking with that person, and I totally understand why. So that's a great point you bring up. Any other thoughts on that first question?
I think I might say that I feel like those of us who have a personal Facebook and like a professional Facebook, or like, and then I think everyone who just like acknowledges that has that inherent knowledge of I can't, or like having that separation, right? And the weight of that institution is just like something that's like sort of inherently known that doesn't necessarily have to be so expressly said, right? Like you know that there needs to be a separation between your personal life and your institutional like persona, right? And I think that's something that is a difficult thing to navigate for sure. You know, at what point do the things that you believe in stop? You know, is it when you walk through that door? You know, or is it like through the records that you bring in, right? I think those are like just like having that knowledge, right? Like that's a difficult thing to have to carry. You know, it's like, when do I stop being who I am?
Yeah, so we'll move on to the next question, which is, what are the long-term concerns of donating to the archives? I heard some really good things, not to put this table on the spotlight, but I'm just sitting right here. Well, you can take the mic. I'm just gonna give it to you.
Oh, go ahead. No,
So we were talking about, one, that a lot of times universities and archival repositories prefer to have a pretty standard deed of gift. So smaller organizations, activists, and other folks have to kind of sign away a lot of rights that maybe they're not comfortable. They can't put use restrictions. The other issue that I think we're not alone in facing is that we have a one-person processing team, right, with limited space, limited resources, and limited support. And so we at ASU have materials from the 90s that have not been processed. That means that if you come to ASU trusting that we are going to preserve your legacy and make it available to you and other people that are interested in that history, you're taking a giant leap of faith that we're actually going to be able to get that work done. Another issue that we're facing is that we're working to implement the protocols for Native American materials, which was just formally adopted by the Society of American Archivists 10 years after they were officially written, right? So in that time, politics change, practices change. We're able to hopefully hear more from people in those communities who are able to better understand the systems they're working with and therefore make different and stronger demands of us. But if we're not even aware of what we have in our backlog, we're not accommodating those issues. So those are my three main points.
Yeah, thank you for that backlog and policies and right. How does that factor into gaining material, gaining access to material, people donating, those other considerations, or like practicality of what archivists are able to do? Any other comments? Awesome. The next question was kind of think of alternatives, thinking about like tools or information, like what are needed. And so it was really cool to be walking around the room and hearing folks being reflective of the practices that organizations or communities that they're part of and possibilities for improvement. Do we have any comments in the room on that question?
Okay, so I am going to talk. So I think for me, when I think about this question, and Alana touched on the Native American protocols, and when I was going through my program at the University of Arizona in 2017, we were taught, and they talked a lot about Merkatu. Merkatu was and continues to be a repository and content management system for Native American indigenous materials that has a lot of flexibility for Native American peoples to come in and document the items, quote unquote, that that are available or that are at institutions that have Native American indigenous materials. And so for me, I believe, and Merkatu has its ups and downs, as with every management system and every content management system. But I think that that for me is a good reflection and a good resource to look at when we're talking about tools that can be inclusive, tools that can be different than what we have normally seen and normally come out of library and information sciences and different things along those lines. And this would help institutions be more attentive and be able to retain the materials in the way that the communities want, and that people in those communities would desire and want from an institution who would hold materials of their community.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that? All right, so we're going to go into the final portion of the workshop, which is on legacy making. Okay. So we're going to get our cards back out. And so the first statement is, I am familiar with the legacy and experience of those of like identities, politics, concerns in this institution. Okay. Oh, I totally meant yellow. I believe my experience at this institution should be documented. Okay, we're gonna come back to this question.
I love the confusion and like looking around. Keep that energy as far as like sharing back. Thank you.
All right, my legacy at my institution is important to me. I feel I am being surveilled on campus. All right. Yes. I am worried about the perception of my support for movements, political candidates, or civil rights. Okay. I want some of my organization's digital presence to be forgotten. All right.
Excellent. So I think I'm going to be selfish. So instead of talking with your group, does anyone feel brave enough to kind of give us immediate thoughts on these statements?
Specifically about surveillance. Well, I'll start. As a Black person, I always feel like I'm being surveilled, specifically working at a white institution. And sometimes that can be a bit much for me, and I can be a bit paranoid. If someone mentions something in my workflow that I have not shared with them, I'm like, how do you know that? So I worry about like the things I'm documenting versus what's being documented about me. So that's a real concern. Mic'd up at the back.
Is it all the way up? Oh, there we go. One of the things I wanted to comment about is I want some of my organization and my digital presence to be forgotten, especially for me as a person of color at ASU. There's so few of us, and I'm going to fuck up. I don't want my fuck ups to be used to judge other students and people of color who come after me, because that's what in the American, as a person of color,
regardless in America, you're always a representative of everyone in the room because there's so few of us. So sometimes I feel like I don't want my fuck ups to be up there because I don't want other people to be judged on what I messed up on. And so that's something that constantly I feel the pressure for. So yeah.
Facts.
I don't know if ASU does it now, but I know it's really strong in the academic universities to want to track students for like retention and basically everyone. And I wouldn't be surprised if they track where we use our ASU Sun cards. And as a staff member, I know that I am legally not allowed to do some political things during my on-time hours. And we were basically told if you post during certain times, even if you don't work that, but they think you may work during that time, it could reflect backly on you. So, for example, if you like work overnight, but you post something political in the middle of the day. So yeah, I do think with that, if they're not surveilling us now, they definitely are trying to think of ways they can get away with it.
I just think to the last point, it gets to the right to move on from the person you used to be, and own the person you are now, and just like what the other person said, the right to control accessibility to your previous fuck-ups. So almost 20 years ago, I testified. There was a congressional committee hearing here in Phoenix on renewing the National Voting Rights Act. And I testified, moved on with my life. Years later, I Googled myself because everyone does that. And I found, to my horror, a transcript of that hearing with all of my remarks, word for word. And apparently I was rambling and incoherent and didn't make a whole lot of sense. And it was deeply shameful to me that my unorganized, not persuasive speech was there preserved for anyone to see on Google. Thankfully now I can't find it anymore. So, but you know, it kind of angered me because I didn't have the ability to petition or request to have that pulled down or to have my identity removed from it. And I continue to think about that, and I caution the students I work with is that fortunately when I was their age, we didn't have any of this stuff. And so all the stupid things I did and could have gone to jail for when I was in my teens and 20s are lost in time. But that's not true for them, and I worry deeply about them and the way they make decisions and how super dramatic everything is when you're 18 and 19. And you know, that decision-making process in their immature brains, there are lifetime consequences for them that didn't exist for people in my generation. But I'm still doing stupid things, and I will continue to do stupid things. So like, how I can go through my Facebook and delete stuff and you know, whatever, but is it really deleted? You know, who knows? So I do think it's something we all need to think a lot about. And it does affect what I post now because I think about my ability to remove it later.
On? Yeah. Hey, Alana was going to talk, but she decided not to, but I will. So I think for me, some of these questions are very important and very the reflectiveness that is needed sometimes in order to be a person of color on a white, predominantly white institution. As you said back here, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, but you back here. Again, we as Black people at ASU are not a monolith, but when one of us decides to step out or do certain things that would reflect upon us and bring possibly negative light upon us, it's then the entire group, like it's all of us. And so that's definitely a concerning factor for me as well, where I literally just do not want anything that would be associated negatively with myself to reflect badly on others who come to this institution after I leave, or if I stay, and then years later have just, hey, you remember 5 years ago you did this, and it was just like, well, why do you know that, or why do you remember that? Like, think about the things that are going on now with me, that I've made an impact, that I've done these certain things, but then you reflect on a negative situation 5 years ago. Why is that? And so I think for me, it definitely brings to light I don't want to be surveilled, but as Shiloh said, you know, I'm sure there are different things that are going on at this institution that they track you through your Sun card, through the cameras that are throughout the entire buildings, throughout campus. And so how can I combat my personal autonomy and my privacy, but at the same time be a person who works at an institution that collects data, that collects all of these different things about the metrics that are needed in order to run this institution. So for me, these questions are very reflective and very personal and very, very, very deep to just reflect on and think about.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm speaking now as like a student at a different university that is not ASU. When I first got like the welcome package, which was a series of emails over like a week, one of them, and this was the most outrageous thing I've ever experienced in my life, was a document that said that made me promise to be a good boy, that I would uphold the Constitution, eat my corn, and I don't know, other American things that you're supposed to do. And my admittance to that school was dependent upon me signing that document, and that document gave permission for that school to surveil me, that I would not be an activist or a protester, that I would not do things that would reflect poorly on that institution. And that was deeply, deeply unsettling. And for my time at that institution, which I'm still attending, is like everything that I do now has to be, very carefully documented, if at all, or that I have to go through channels to make sure that if I do something that that I'm not found, and my name is very searchable, which is also deeply unsettling. But my admittance, my participation was, predicated on my signing of that document, and for that time, I gave up my rights, and that's what it takes. I had to sit and think about that for a really long time. Do I want to sign this? Is the worth of the degree that I'm going to get worth, them having full access? And for that to be just sort of ingrained in the way that an institution conducts itself at day one, and now that's the way I think about that place. So that's something that like, it's been months. I still think about that, like, at least once a week, of just like, I can't be visible, in a lot of ways. It's very interesting. It's very new to me too.
I think I come to these set of questions with a couple of different positionalities. So positionality as a participant in activist groups, but speaking from my positionality as an archivist at an institution, I think a lot about these questions as I'm asking students, particularly students who have been marginalized within the PWI where I work, to sign away permission to give materials to an archive, to submit their paper in the institutional repository, to give me permission to archive social media and websites at a moment, a lot of the students I'm asking these things are in their teens and their early 20s. And I'm asking them to make this decision to trust and to place materials that could be accessed, could be used against them, like students who have been doxxed, students have been threatened within the context of the institution. And I think about approaching my work with an ethics of care, and thinking about the different positionalities that I hold in other spaces. And I guess just thinking about kind of going back to an earlier question about tools, about what would be a useful tool, is I think a lot about almost like versioning, we're approaching these kinds of questions and how we're approaching these kinds of conversations, and all that kind of exceeds the language of a deed of gift, all that exceeds the formal documentation of a transfer of records, but how we're saying, like, you can trust us, like all these things, but obviously I won't work at this institution forever. I think about what are the tools that need to be put into place for that kind of institutional memory or responsibility to conversations that I'm having as I ask people to put trust in me.
Oh, we have two mics here now. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about, I believe my experience at this institution should be documented and kind of how you want to be remembered. So as much as I love being a behind the scenes person, in about 20 days, I move into somewhat of a different position at the University of Illinois as archivist of multicultural collections and services. And while it's really exciting to get a job like that, of course, you never really know what you're getting yourself into until that experience happens. And as I've thought more and more about moving into that position, which I've kind of started doing that type of work, it's the feeling of I want to make sure that I live up to that position, and that I didn't just have this job that had a really great sounding title to it. And other people who have learned about this position at other institutions have said, we want to hire an archivist with that type of role. Now we can say, oh, look, U of I hired someone. And so it's something that I really think about as well, that other places have this mindset. And so there is, I think, a little bit of that pressure to want to really deliver on that so that other institutions trying to advocate in some ways can. And also, you know, just being a Black woman early in career, I don't know this for sure, so I want to be careful, but I think I am the second Black archivist there. And so word about me gets around pretty quickly. And people have said, because my position until a few months ago, I knew it was visiting, and people said, when you leave, I don't know that some of this work, I don't know if it's going to get done or not. And that is and so while it's exciting that people are happy I'm staying, and that they're communicating, there's also that fear of, well, what if I do leave? And it doesn't mean that it's for a negative reason, but just things change in life. Is that going to be a priority to create that position again, whether I am successful at it or there's a lot of room for improvement? So those are things I definitely think about of just, I think we don't always, while we love documenting other people, it is the way that we deliver in our positions that really can impact what happens in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Jessica and Martha, for kind of speaking to our unique positionalities.
So one of the thoughts I had just listening to this was about the right to be forgotten and social media, and just how some organizations use social media, particularly like local governments that may use it to shame individuals. And we don't really have a good way of having a right to be forgotten in this country for these things. So just thinking about, you know, how do we capture this information responsibly? And I mean, should we be capturing it at all, depending on what it is? Because yeah, someone may screw up, and you know, then suddenly their mugshot's on Facebook and being spread all over the internet, and I think that's really wrong. Yeah. Yeah, I think we should leave room to be forgotten in a lot of this social media.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? All right, for the sake of time, we have about 10 minutes left. We're going to discuss the group questions as a larger group. So, Micha. So this thing about these last few ones, I feel like a few of them we've kind of talked about as far as like, how do you want to be remembered? Some folks mentioned it's bad things that have happened could be erased some. So we talked about that, but we really want to hear you all talk about what are ways to participate in our document from a memory worker perspective. And so some of us might already hold those positionalities. Some of us may identify more as an organizer. But think about what are potential commitments or ways that we can improve personal documentation or not documentation of the ways that we're engaging in resistance and protest today. So do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, actually, I kind of have a question for the students. Before I came to ASU, I worked for the Maricopa Community Colleges, and when there was a law change that made it much more expensive to attend for undocumented students, there was a lot of student activism from the undocumented community, putting pressure on the governing board to do things, frankly, to thwart the legislature. And it took a long time for the institution to respond, and I was one of the go-betweens trying to help have these conversations and spaces. The reason I bring this up is a lot of times, in retrospect, we feel like the historical things that happened were foregone conclusions that this was going to happen. But it really was necessary for the undocumented students to speak as loudly as they did and as unprofessionally and as provocatively as they did in many spaces to get people to get off their asses and take the issue seriously and do things. So my point is, none of that's documented as far as I know. And so it'd be easy now to kind of gloss over or be very dismissive or just not know what an important role these undocumented organizations and students had. That said, would they have wanted their participation, the specific things they said, the things they did in governing board meetings, would they have wanted someone to archive all of that? So it's an important story. It's probably going to be lost in time. But should it have been memorialized in some way, and what would have been the right way to do that? And I don't know the answers to those questions, so I'm kind of asking for the young people here to kind of weigh in on what in a perfect world would have happened to capture that story.
I think one of the things that always interests me is sitting in this room. I think I've only heard one person say they're an undergraduate student. I'm a graduate student, so I don't think even students know what an archive is. And so when we start talking to them, I think that's where we should start and asking them as like, do you want this information? Explaining to them what exactly an archive is and how it's used would be really helpful for them to think about, well, do I want, and putting it in terms that are understandable to them. Like you telling me, well, I'm going to archive this thing and future generations will see it. I'm like, well, what future generations? But instead of telling me, well, I'm going to archive it so your children can come back and see that this is what you did with your graduate career. Sounds more interesting to me than saying future generations. I don't know who's going to be at ASU when in 10 years from now, and keeping in mind that we all, at least I think that the way the institution is structured, it's not for people like who look like me. So making it very accessible and maybe thinking about ways how we can make the archive accessible to others, not only thinking about how we can redo the deeds of trust or the deeds of gift, and thinking about, well, can we archive some things, or can we help you archive things but not put them in the archive, and you can hold on to them, and then when you feel you're ready, or when the time you feel the political moment or the time has passed and you're ready for that thing to now be accessible to everyone else, we can do that. So kind of trying to find different ways of doing archival work, not just the regular way we've done archival work.
Hello? Okay. I really appreciated that point about students, and I think there are a lot of great principles in the area of personal digital archiving, like how you talk to people about the things that you're creating anyway. And I think at least our predecessors who are dealing with university archives and college collections and talking to students is these students are already records creators. And so the conversations can be oriented toward what do you want to be remembered doing. And then, like you're saying, being aware that there are options for what happens after that is a really powerful thing, and letting the students or individuals decide that. Another thing that we've been successful with, and why we're so proud to be part, even in a small way, of what Project Stand has been doing is students identifying and discovering and calling attention to the history of student activism on our campus, and them seeing people who literally look like them, are the same age as them, maybe in a different time, and then also seeing themselves doing this kind of same action, trying to ask for the same things, I think brings resonance to the idea that what they're doing is history making. Doesn't matter what format.
Just very quickly, I'm sorry, I don't know your name back here, but you made a very good point. So yes, there is a lot of, let me back up. So I'm a part of a grant-funded project called, I'm gonna mess this up. It's engaging, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of the project here.
I know the first part is engaging, educating, and empowering, and then I know that there are additional words after that.
Yes, thank you. So anyway, sorry. The grant was awarded to Nancy Godoy over here through the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, where we go out and we do community-driven archives. So what that means is that while necessarily, you know, ASU is a collecting institution, we as a project and a program go out to communities, marginalized communities, and talk to them about the importance of their documents. You'll probably hear more about our project tomorrow during our panel, but I'm just a plug on that. But anyways, so this is part of our mission and part of the praxis change that is going on, at least in archival work, especially where marginalized communities and marginalized people are concerned. So as a personal story, the reason why I got into archives was because I knew and I noticed that my personal history was not recorded. I'm gonna cry, so please apologize, my voice is going up and down. And so for me, this is a personal project, personal just mission on my end to make it available and make stories that are similar to mine, people who are similar to me, accessible, important, and available, whether or not it's through an institution or through a family archive. So we have had many people come to our events on the weekends who bring pictures, who bring stories, who bring literally everything that they can possibly think of and talk to us and do you know, just memory work where we'll scan for them. We'll scan up to 50 documents for them and put it on a thumb drive so that they can share that with their families. We also, if they would like to, we take oral histories where they can talk to up to 30 minutes about anything that they want to talk about with their family history. And so these particular aspects, while not very prevalent in archival work, are becoming very important, very much visible within the archival practice. And so to be a part of the project that I am currently a part of is very important to me and very important to the people on our team, because we recognize that institutions do not and sometimes will not take these stories or have the ability to tell them in the way that a person or a family or just them recollecting it through an oral history would do. And so, yes, it's important to have the ability to have institutions like ASU or any collective or collection institution take on somebody else's or somebody's documents. But for your family, if you don't want to do that, you have the ability to do that. Your story is important. Your documents, no matter what you know, they are, family history, anything along those lines are important. And so that is part of the project that I'm a part of.
Thank you. We're going to take this one last question in our statement.
Well, thank Jess for the back and forth here, because probably a shameless plug for tomorrow too. But due to that work that was mentioned, started by Nancy and Alana and Jess and everybody else with their team, it's actually started conversations within other spaces in the university or in the library system. So example, I work for the Librella Center, and this is traditionally, historically been this collection that's housed all the Native American collections, archival materials, and just overall printed materials. But beyond that, of course, we help Native students with their information needs and provide that more familiar face, you know, when they come to the library. But other than that, and the work that they started inspired us to more or less help with that work in our communities. And the way the grant was set up, which I guess they can break down why like natives weren't included in the initial grant, due to this other historical stuff that kind of separates us as people of color and indigenous people. But with that, we were able to expand that into our collection and our services. So example, the young woman that spoke earlier, she works with us. She's one of our student workers. And it was mainly when I met with her, when I interviewed her, we shared this work and it touched on what's going on in her community because she's Hiachadautam. And I'm Thonautam, like I was saying, it's Autumn. We're all in this area. But in her case, which is so messed up, is that in the history books in this institution or at your library, it shows that Hiachadautam are extinct. So where she, from her community, I mean, there's a lot of intermarriage. So, she's enrolled in the Thonautam Nation. And I feel sorry that I'm speaking for her. I wish she was here to share this story, but she has class right now. Is that she saw this, like, how we can help preserve that history and use it in a way that with her mom, who is also a lawyer who just graduated from the law school last semester, wants to have that process to get federal recognition and to use those materials as a way to then advocate for tribal sovereignty in that sense. So I guess that to the question on here regarding how as memory workers or, librarians and archivists, how we can support grassroots efforts. I think for Native people, a lot of like the story I shared there applies across Indian country, across the world, so like I'm really happy that she came and I'm gonna encourage her, hey, you should be a librarian or archivist or, intellectual property lawyer that helps with, with these conversations. Because back to a point that was mentioned earlier around the right to not, right to forgotten. Yeah, that was a conversation that Native people are having now about the right to destroy like those histories, because a lot of our stuff was unfortunately undocumented in a way when there was no consent. So example, one of the lawyers at the law school here, his name's Trevor Reed. He's Hopi and he specializes in intellectual property law. And that's something he's looking into on an international level with tribes, is that we as Native people should have the right to destroy, these items, these materials that don't support us as indigenous people. And it's been very interesting hearing that conversation, because even outside of just bad information, or not to say bad, but this information we don't want out there anymore, just even on the traditional level where ceremonies were documented 100 years ago from some anthropologists that just came to our communities and recordings and videotapes and so on, like all that data that they grabbed, they didn't ask. So like in a ceremonial traditional sense, if those stories are now out to the open, it causes a lot of disharmony in our life ways. So if that ceremony now has been tainted, we have the right to destroy it, right? To just so it doesn't exist anymore. So just kind of hearing all that and kind of like the conversation now with just getting young people involved, I think as a Native person, from my perspective, Native people definitely can benefit from the archives. They can benefit from the work, the community-driven archives work that Nancy and her crew started. But it's just a matter of just putting it out there and having that support. And sometimes in these institutions, we don't get the support we would like or prefer, where we can have a centralized team or a team that can be dedicated to do that. But that's why we're here today, is to advocate for that and be able to say like, here, the work's growing. It's not just this team over here or us over here. I mean, we're really one team in that sense, but due to how the university is, I guess it looks like we're separated. But hopefully the website will consolidate all those services in a way where it's like, here's what we do, and we're here to help. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you. And before I pass it over to Mike, I just want to thank everyone for being a part of the workshop today. Thank you, Nala Vega, for your comments. And I hope we all feel more empowered to go out and dialogue with each other, dialogue with students, create more inclusive and ethical ways to document and archives. So I'm going to pass it over to Micha. We're wrapped up. I'll pass it over to Shannon.
Thank you, Micha and Jessica. That was fantastic. A lot to think about and take to lunch, right? So just a couple of logistical things. Lunch is at the back. You'll see it back there. Do take time to hang out here, eat, enjoy a meal, share dialogue, conversation. It was pretty deep this morning, which is fantastic, but you see, you can lighten it up a little bit, tell a joke, talk about the weather, whatever, but also be meaningful, be deliberate. We are reimbursing for parking, So if you got the little blue ticket parked in one of the parking lots that do that, you can meet with Chris, who's in the back, in the blue back there, and she'll work her magic and get you reimbursed for parking. Our keynote will start at 1 o'clock, right? Yeah. And so don't go far after lunch, wander around the building a little bit. The other thing I wanted to ask is we'll be at the end of the today's program offer a tour of the Hayden Library. So this library was originally opened in 1966. It was just reinvented, renovated here over the past couple of years. I think we kind of, all the staff, everyone moved out 2017. It underwent its change, and then we moved back in. And everything in the building is very deliberate in how it's laid out and set up, and it's a kind of a fascinating just a science to hear about. So we'll offer a tour of the library, each floor of the library at the end of today. So at our close, we wanted to get an idea of how many people are interested in doing that tour and how many groups they would need to have for that. So just raise your hand, raise your green card. No, raise your hand if you're interested in doing the tour. So let's see. I think it's about, Chris, do you know how long it is? How long the tour is? Yeah, if you ask a lot of questions, Era, could be a couple hours. I think it's at least a 30-minute, like 45-minute tour, kind of depending on how many questions you ask, kind of thing. So, all right, so raise your hands and I'll get a count. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Awesome. Okay. All right. Fantastic. So I'll let them know. I do have an update on Lael too, who are our project stand representative, who's supposed to speak this morning and then do the close today. She is still delayed. Yeah. So she thinks she might make it here by around our closing time, but we'll probably move her remarks then to tomorrow morning and just adjust that schedule for that today. She does have really important things to say. So we are going to wait and hear her things to say. So other than that, we'll go ahead and take a break for lunch. And we look forward to our keynote speaker at 1 o'clock. So thank you very much. Take care.